Imagine you want to completely dominate the global pop music industry today, like right now in the year 2026.
Which is definitely a wild landscape to look at right now.
Right, it totally is. So you're looking at the landscape, weighing your options, and if you consult the traditional playbook, it basically outlines a binary path. You essentially have to choose between two completely disparate ecosystems.
Yeah, the industry has historically forced that exact choice. It operates on this really stark division between total independence and massive institutional backing.
Exactly. So path A is that you build a risky, independent grassroots empire. You take on absolutely all the financial risk, you handle your own complex logistics, and you basically rely on the hope that sheer willpower and, localized momentum can eventually break through all the global noise.
Which is incredibly hard.
Mhm.
And then path B is that you surrender to a massive legacy conglomerate.
Yep, the machine.
Right. You trade your creative control, your physical autonomy, and honestly a massive chunk of your intellectual property. And in exchange, you get instant distribution, massive promotional budgets, and access to all those entrenched gatekeepers.
And for decades, blending those two models was functionally impossible, wasn't it?
Oh, entirely. You were either the scrappy indie underdog operating on the fringes, fighting the machine, or you are the polished, heavily compromised product manufactured entirely by that machine. I mean, the infrastructure simply did not overlap.
But the landscape we are looking at today tells a very different story. The biggest explosion in global pop music right now, specifically original Philippine music, or what we call OPM, is proving those old rules are completely obsolete.
Yeah, the parameters of global success have just fundamentally shifted.
So today, we are taking a deep dive into two distinct artists who are basically rewriting these rules from completely opposite ends of the spectrum.
Which is my favorite thing to analyze, honestly.
Same here. We are examining the boy band SB19, who basically act as the architects of absolute independence. And on the flip side, we have the solo balladeer Gwyn Dorado, who represents the absolute masterclass of elite institutional assimilation in South Korea.
And, on paper, their corporate models are diametrically opposed. They couldn't be more different. But the underlying mechanics of their operations reveal that they are achieving the exact same unprecedented level of global dominance.
It's fascinating. So for you listening, our mission today goes way beyond just listing chart metrics or running through streaming numbers. We are looking at the foundational architecture of the modern music business.
Right, the actual blueprints.
Exactly. The goal is to unpack these two wildly different blueprints for global dominance. We need to dissect their corporate strategies, analyze the intense psychology and digital architecture of their fan bases, and ultimately reveal how their distinct successes are intersecting to forge a brand new hybrid model for the future of global pop.
That intersection really is the key. Because the future of the international music industry over the next decade is actively being coded by these two specific case studies.
I have to say, I used to look at the music industry as a purely artistic endeavor, but reviewing the documentation on these two artists completely changed my perspective.
How so?
Well, I think it is way more accurate to view them through the lens of technological development. SB19 is essentially a disruptive tech startup.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right, because they looked at the legacy systems of the entertainment industry, identified that the source code was way too restrictive and too extractive, and they simply built their own operating system entirely from scratch.
Yeah, they just completely bypassed the legacy code to write their own reality.
Exactly. But then you have Gwyn Dorado, and she operates much more like an elite developer who recognized the immense power of an entrenched, notoriously rigid legacy system, specifically the South Korean entertainment machine.
Right, which is arguably the most rigid system in the world.
Absolutely. So instead of avoiding it or trying to build competing software like SB19 did, she just walked right through the front door. She learned the back-end architecture of that system and mastered it from the inside out, specifically to alter its emotional frequency and redirect its overall output.
She basically learned the blueprints of the fortress so thoroughly that she became the one deciding who controls the defense mechanisms.
That's a perfect way to put it. So to really understand the mechanics of these two blueprints, we have to start with the architects of independence.
Let's get into it.
We need to detail the structural foundation of a company called 1Z Entertainment. For you listening, this is the independent corporate ecosystem built entirely by SB19.
Right, and to really contextualize what 1Z Entertainment represents today, in 2026, we have to look at the legal and structural realities of their origins back in 2018.
Because they didn't start out independent.
Not at all. They began their careers deep inside the very machine they eventually broke away from.
Yeah, they originally debuted under Showbiz Philippines, which was a local branch of a South Korean company. And I think we all know the baseline reality of the Korean idol training system.
It is grueling. It's a totalizing approach to artistic development.
Totally. It's designed to strip away individual inconsistencies so a group moves and sounds as a perfectly unified entity. I don't think we need to rehash the physical toll of that boot camp today because, honestly, anyone following global pop is intimately familiar with the 12-hour dance practices and the intense media training.
Yeah, the physical grind is well documented.
Right. What fascinates me so much more is the corporate transition.
Well, the psychological and legal threshold they crossed is the real story here, because they endured that corporate umbrella for 5 years. They built their foundational skills, achieved a massive localized viral breakthrough, and frankly generated significant capital for that agency.
They made them a lot of money.
Exactly. But in 2023, they executed a corporate extraction that completely altered the power dynamics of the entire region.
The radical breakaway. Because usually, when a group outgrows a mid-tier label, the standard playbook dictates that they leverage their newfound fame to just negotiate a better revenue split with a larger conglomerate.
Yeah, they look for a more comfortable cage, one with better corporate amenities and stronger international distribution networks.
Right, that's always the path of least resistance, trading up within the existing hierarchy. But SB19 totally rejected that path. They chose total creative control and the absolute protection of their intellectual property, forming their own fully independent corporate ecosystem, 1Z Entertainment.
And we really have to emphasize the magnitude of this risk from a legal and financial standpoint.
Yeah.
It cannot be overstated.
Because of the intellectual property, right?
Precisely. When artists attempt to leave the corporate safety net, the primary battleground is always intellectual property. The legacy agency almost always owns the master recordings, the publishing rights, and critically, the actual trademark to the group's name.
Which is terrifying.
It is. Attempting to extract those assets usually results in years of paralyzing litigation.
Which basically means losing your momentum. If you are locked in a courtroom for 3 years, the pop cycle just moves on without you. People forget.
Exactly. And beyond the legal battles, going independent means you instantly sever your legacy relationships. You lose the automatic broadcast television slots that the conglomerate's PR team always secures for you.
Oh, wow. Right. You lose the baked-in corporate sponsorships and the guaranteed placement on algorithmic playlists. You're starting from zero.
You're entirely on your own. But what is truly remarkable is how they are operating today in 2026. 1Z Entertainment isn't just like a vanity label meant to give them a fancy title on a press release.
No, the group members themselves act as the executive suite. It's crazy.
It's unheard of at this scale. The leader of the group serves as the CEO. Another member operates as the chief operating officer. Another is the management director.
I mean, transitioning from being the creative product to actively operating as the executive suite, managing the logistics of that product, that requires an incredibly difficult psychological pivot.
Oh, absolutely. You are suddenly responsible for payroll, human resources, and the strategic allocation of capital, all while still having to write hits and perform.
And you can clearly see how this independence has altered their approach to talent acquisition. 1Z Entertainment is actively holding auditions for new trainees right now, specifically targeting the 15 to 25-year-old demographic to build a new girl group and a co-ed group.
But they are completely subverting the modern industry standard for scouting.
Yes, they are utilizing a strictly unedited video submission strategy.
Which is so refreshing.
It really is. They require applicants to upload unedited, raw, landscape format videos of their vocals and dancing via unlisted video links. There is absolutely no reality television artifice.
No sob stories edited in post-production.
Right. No dramatic lighting, no pitch correction, just raw talent.
This is a direct, deliberate rejection of the very system that trained them. The traditional idol survival show model relies heavily on manufacturing a narrative. The broadcast network needs the underdog story. They need the visual center who might lack talent but generates engagement, and they need the controversial contestant to drive ratings.
I used to think those survival shows were just a fun marketing tool to build a fan base before a group officially debuted. But looking at 1Z's strategy, I realize those shows are actually a massive financial drain and a total distraction from core competency.
They are highly inefficient if your primary goal is long-term artistic sustainability.
Yeah, because independent operators like Onesie Entertainment do not have the luxury of carrying a trainee who is only useful for reality television drama.
Exactly. They require raw, highly moldable talent with the stamina to survive the actual unglamorous realities of independent touring.
Which brings us directly to the sheer financial and logistical audacity of their recent world tour. They called it the beginning and end tour, and the scale of this operation is genuinely staggering when you realize they do not have a legacy conglomerate underwriting it.
Oh, the routing and risk management of a 19-city global arena tour is a logistical nightmare even for established multinational labels, let alone an indie startup.
Exactly. We are talking about major arenas in Dubai, Tokyo, Sydney, extensive routing across North America, culminating in a massive finale on April 18th, 2026 at the SMDC Festival grounds in Manila. Let's break down the economics of this for a second.
Please do.
When a legacy conglomerate books an arena, they rely on massive cash reserves. If a venue underperforms, or if there is a sudden issue with international visas resulting in a canceled date, the conglomerate simply absorbs the financial hit. It basically becomes a tax write-off.
Right. The conglomerate acts as a massive shock absorber.
Yeah.
But for an independent label, every single financial obligation falls directly on the executive suite.
Exactly. Every single deposit to hold a venue, the international freight costs for the stage equipment, the insurance policies, the flights and accommodations for a crew of 50 people, all of that capital comes directly out of Onesie's operating budget.
It's terrifying. If one leg of that tour collapses, it doesn't just mean a bad quarter on a balance sheet, it could potentially bankrupt the entire enterprise.
The margin for error is razor thin. Securing performance visas for the United States, managing the fluctuating exchange rates across multiple territories, and navigating local union regulations for stagehands in cities like Tokyo and Sydney, it requires a level of administrative competence that most artists completely outsource.
They usually never even see that side of the business.
Right, but they successfully executed it. However, I do have to push back on the dominant narrative that this is purely a brilliant business move or just a story of financial triumph.
Oh, how so?
Well, if you review the documentary released on Netflix that tracked their earlier eras, the intense mental health struggles they endured under the old system are glaringly apparent.
That's very true. The pressure of operating as pioneers for an emerging genre on a global stage was causing severe psychological fracturing for them.
Yeah, they were carrying the weight of an entire national industry on their backs. So when I analyze Onesie Entertainment and this massive 19-city self-funded tour, the financial success actually feels secondary to me.
What's the primary victory then?
To me, this independence is an act of absolute psychological liberation. They took control of the corporate infrastructure so they could dictate the industry's pace, rather than allowing the industry's relentless demands to just crush them.
That is a really profound way to look at it. By owning the infrastructure, they reclaim their autonomy. They possess the executive power to mandate their own rest periods and establish their own creative timelines.
Which you never get under a conglomerate.
Never. True independence is rarely just about maximizing royalty percentages. It is fundamentally about preserving the artist's sanity and longevity.
Absolutely. But, absolute independence does have a ceiling. You can build your own fortress, but you cannot outmuscle a foreign nation's broadcasting algorithms from the outside.
No, you really can't.
If you want to conquer a hyper-insular market, you have to find an entirely different mechanism. And that brings us to Gwyn Dorado.
The absolute model of elite institutional assimilation.
Exactly. Gwyn chose to walk directly into one of the most notoriously rigid, insular, and protective entertainment machines on the planet. The South Korean broadcast and idol system.
Which is a bold move for anyone, let alone a foreigner.
Right. And not only did she survive the internal pressures of that system, she is currently dominating it at the highest level in 2026.
Her foundation is completely distinct from the centralized idol bootcamp model we just talked about with SB19, which I think really explains her unique adaptability.
Yeah, we have to trace her development back to her childhood to really understand her specific methodology. At 3 years old, she was singing karaoke in Quezon City. By the first grade, she relocated to Singapore, which immediately forced her to adapt to a new cultural and linguistic environment.
That kind of early displacement forces you to become highly observant.
Exactly. She developed into this fiercely independent, self-taught musician, mastering multiple instruments entirely on her own without the strict oversight of an agency vocal coach.
And that self-taught, highly adaptable nature formed the absolute core of her corporate strategy later in her career.
Right. So the crucible moment when the global industry first recognized her potential occurred in 2015 on the first season of Asia's Got Talent. She was only 10 years old.
Just a kid.
Just a kid. She walked onto a massive international stage and delivered this stripped-down acoustic performance of Katy Perry's Roar.
And that performance earned a standing ovation from David Foster.
Which is wild.
It is. He is famously one of the most exacting and difficult-to-please producers in the history of pop music.
Yeah, receiving that level of validation from an industry titan at age 10 could easily push an artist toward the trap of viral reality TV fame. Chasing the next viral moment.
Very easily.
But her next move was a pivot into professional theater. She took on highly demanding roles in productions of Annie and the Sound of Music.
Which, again, shows incredible strategic restraint. The discipline of musical theater is an entirely different operational mode. It demands immense physical stamina, the ability to hit specific stage marks perfectly for 8 shows a week, and the technical skill to protect your vocal cords while delivering raw emotional resonance to the back row of a massive theater.
And she maintained this trajectory while balancing intense academic rigor. Even today, as she climbs the global charts, she is actively studying at a university via distance learning.
The level of compartmentalization required to manage top-tier academic demands alongside a skyrocketing international music career is staggering.
It really is. And she applied that exact same hyper-focused compartmentalization to her corporate strategy upon entering the South Korean market.
Let's contrast SB19's self-governance with Gwyn's blueprint here, because it's so interesting. Gwyn operates on a highly specialized dual-agency framework.
Right. She signed an exclusive 5-year management contract with AO Entertainment, but critically, she secured a simultaneous 2-year promotional deal with a boutique label called Music Farm.
And Music Farm is the absolute linchpin of her strategy. They are not a massive idol factory churning out highly synchronized, metric-driven dance groups. They are a highly respected, prestige label within Korea, specifically renowned for cultivating elite acoustic ballad musicians and mature soloists.
So she recognized her lane. She didn't just sign with the largest conglomerate offering the biggest advance. She strategically aligned with the specific institution that possessed the institutional knowledge and the network architecture tailored to her particular artistic voice.
Exactly. And under that dual agency structure, she deployed a philosophy her management termed connect first, project later.
This is where I think most Western artists completely fail when attempting to cross over into Asian markets. The standard international strategy is brute forcing English songs onto foreign platforms, relying on heavy marketing spend and the sheer catchiness of the hook, and basically just hoping it translates.
Yeah, just trying to overwhelm the market. But Gwyn entirely inverted that approach.
She did. She subjected herself to absolute linguistic immersion.
It's incredible discipline.
She spent 4 grueling months relentlessly perfecting her Korean pronunciation before making her major promotional push. Her explicit goal was to completely shatter the foreigner barrier.
And the sociology of the South Korean music market is vital to understand here. It is a highly domestic, fiercely protective ecosystem. When a foreign artist attempts to sing in Korean, the domestic audience's ear is hyper-attuned to the phonetics.
Like they can hear the slightest deviation.
Oh, absolutely. The linguistic mechanics of vowel placement in English or other languages are very different from Korean. If an artist's accent is heavy, or if they misplace the subtle honorifics in the lyricism, they are subconsciously categorized by the listener as a novelty act.
The audience basically stops engaging with the emotion of the song because they are distracted by the mechanics of the delivery. It becomes a gimmick rather than a piece of art.
Exactly. Getting the pronunciation 90% correct is almost worse than getting it 50% correct because it creates this uncanny valley of pronunciation. The listener feels a constant low-level friction.
Wow, that makes so much sense.
Right. By dedicating those 4 months to perfecting the phonetics, Gwyn eliminated that friction. She signaled a profound localized respect for the host culture, and this allowed the Korean audience to bypass their internal novelty filters and connect directly with the psychological weight of her vocal delivery.
And the ultimate data point validating this assimilation strategy is her historic run on the Korean vocal survival show, Sing Again 4.
That run was legendary.
You have a foreign 21-year-old artist stepping onto a major national broadcast network, competing directly against veteran domestic vocal powerhouses. And during her finale performance, she performs an original R&B track called Light Up, produced by the elite Korean hip-hop producer Groovy Room.
And the scoring metrics for that performance are literally unprecedented.
She scored 799 out of 800 possible points from the judging panel.
Just let that sink in.
I mean, to receive a 799 from a panel of veteran Korean industry executives and legacy artists means there was absolute, undeniable consensus regarding her technical execution and emotional resonance.
She wasn't graded on a curve as an international guest. She was operating at the absolute elite tier by their own strict domestic standards, securing second place overall for the entire season.
It's phenomenal. But let me play the role of the modern independent music purist for a moment
Yeah,
here.
go for it.
If independence is currently viewed as the absolute holy grail of the industry, if building your own label and retaining all your master rights, like 1Z Entertainment, is the ultimate flex, why didn't Gwyn just build her own grassroots YouTube label in Seoul? Why sign a 5-year contract and give away a percentage of her revenue?
Simply put, attempting a purely independent, grassroots strategy in Seoul as a foreign soloist would be commercial suicide.
Really? I understand it would be difficult, but commercial suicide.
Unquestionably. The South Korean entertainment industry does not operate as a pure meritocracy based on YouTube virality. It is a deeply fortified, vertically integrated ecosystem controlled by impenetrable gatekeepers.
Like who?
We're talking about the broadcast network executives who dictate primetime television appearances, the program directors who allocate the highly lucrative original soundtrack opportunities, and the engineers who maintain the domestic streaming algorithms like Melon.
So an independent artist with an acoustic guitar and a viral YouTube channel simply cannot brute force their way past those gatekeepers.
The institutional walls are just too thick. Gwyn made a highly calculated trade. She exchanged the romanticized ideal of total independence for something exponentially more valuable in that specific territorial market: institutional leverage.
Okay.
By embedding herself within Korean agencies, she bypassed the gatekeepers entirely. She gained immediate access to elite producers like Groovy Room, secured primetime slots on national television, and tapped into a legacy distribution network that an independent foreign artist physically could not access alone. She basically utilized the machine to amplify her humanity.
That structural reality fundamentally dictates the way these artists interact with their listeners, too. Because their corporate architectures are so radically different, the psychological makeup of their fan bases must operate on entirely opposite frequencies.
Oh, the corporate infrastructure directly informs the fandom psychology. They are deeply linked.
Which perfectly leads us into the fandom dichotomy. We are observing a stark contrast here between highly coordinated digital warfare and the cultivation of organic emotional ecosystems. Let's analyze SB19's fandom first, known in English as Ours. The name itself signifies deep ownership and collective responsibility.
And from a structural perspective, ours does not behave like a traditional fan club. They operate as a decentralized, highly sophisticated global digital marketing agency.
The level of coordination is genuinely intimidating. They utilize centralized digital hubs to execute daily action checklists.
It's not just casual listening.
Not at all. We are not talking about fans casually tweeting their appreciation for a new music video. We're talking about uniform hashtag strategies meticulously designed to manipulate global trending algorithms. I read about their daily checklists. They are actively clearing their browser caches, rotating IP addresses, and manually typing search queries rather than clicking direct links, specifically to avoid triggering algorithmic spam penalties.
It's brilliant. They run coordinated shifts across multiple global time zones to ensure relentless 24/7 engagement. They approach chart dominance as a military logistics operation.
And the resulting metrics are staggering. Look at the global Billboard Fan Army face-off. The Ours fandom secured that global championship for 3 consecutive years, 2023, 2024, and 2025.
Against massive competition.
They systematically outmaneuvered the fan bases of massive Western pop titans. They defeated the organic listeners of Tate McRae, Ariana Grande, Post Malone, and Shabuzi. And in the final round of 2025, they overwhelmed Selena Gomez's massive global following, capturing 60.1% of the final vote.
To capture a 60% supermajority against an entrenched Western pop icon requires a level of coordination that organic passive listening simply cannot generate.
So what drives this? Why is this specific fandom mobilized to such an intense degree?
It is entirely rooted in the narrative of the group's origins. The Ours fandom is bound together by a shared, highly publicized narrative of the group's early struggles. The fans witnessed the grueling training, they observed the severe mental health hurdles, and they actively participated in the massive financial risk of the group going independent.
So the fans feel a sense of equity. They feel like they literally laid the bricks for 1Z Entertainment.
Precisely. For the Ours fandom, executing a streaming campaign or dominating a voting poll is not merely an expression of musical preference, it's a vital act of protection.
Wow.
The psychological thesis driving the fandom is that by dominating the digital metrics, they are building a protective barrier around the group, guaranteeing their survival in a notoriously hostile industry. They're actively fighting to keep the independent ecosystem alive.
Now let's contrast that militarized digital warfare with Gwyn Dorado's fandom, known in English as the balloon flowers. It is an entirely different sociological phenomenon. The balloon flowers represent an audience built on profound emotional resonance, solitary listening habits, and a deep appreciation for Gwyn's artistic vulnerability.
It relies on passive, deeply personal engagement rather than active, competitive mobilization.
And this is where I believe many industry executives fail when they attempt to force a single operational blueprint onto every single artist on their roster. Treating every fan base like a digital army represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how different types of art function.
You can't just apply one template to everyone.
Exactly. Think of it like this. It's like comparing a high-stakes, competitive, multiplayer video game to the experience of sitting alone in a quiet room reading a deeply personal, heartbreaking memoir.
That's a great analogy. The engagement mechanics are fundamentally opposed.
Right. SB19's fandom operates like the multiplayer game. Everyone is logged on, headsets are active, they're calling out strategic coordinates, and they are hyper-focused on dominating the global scoreboard. It is thrilling, exhausting, and highly effective for their specific genre of high-energy pop.
But Gwyn's fandom is the individual reading the memoir.
Exactly. If a label executive bursts into that quiet room and screams, "Read faster! You have to beat the other readers! Turn the page! Let's go!" they completely shatter the emotional vulnerability of the art. They sever the connection.
If Gwyn's management attempted to weaponize the balloon flowers into a digital militia, imposing daily streaming quotas and aggressive voting campaigns, it would completely violate the core emotional contract she has established with them. Her music is designed to be absorbed, not weaponized.
But this introduces a massive structural dilemma. If Gwyn cannot rely on a mobilized digital army to artificially inflate her streaming numbers, how does she survive the brutal reality of the South Korean digital charts? Because the Korean industry is obsessively metric-driven.
It is. And to understand her survival, we really have to unpack the specific architecture of the Korean streaming algorithms, particularly looking at the premier domestic metric, the Melon Music Awards.
I used to assume that if an artist had 100 million views on YouTube, that momentum just automatically translated to chart dominance everywhere, but the Melon system completely blocks that.
Yeah, the Melon Music Awards represent the absolute gold standard for domestic success in Korea, and their algorithm is specifically designed to neutralize international fan armies. Raw YouTube views generated by a global audience literally input as a mathematical zero into the Melon chart algorithm.
Because they require strict identity verification, right?
Exactly. The platform mandates a registered Korean phone number or domestic identification just to maintain an active account. It is basically the streaming equivalent of a Know Your Customer or KYC banking regulation.
That is so intense.
It is. This architecture was explicitly engineered to prevent international zombie streaming or botting, which is the exact tactic global fan armies utilize to inflate numbers on Western platforms.
They built a digital fortress specifically to keep the digital armies out, ensuring the charts reflect the genuine, everyday listening habits of the domestic Korean public. So the global digital warfare strategy that fuels 1Z entertainment physically cannot be executed for Gwyn inside Korea.
She has to rely on a completely different mechanism, which we term the indirect conversion funnel. Her objective is not to win a concentrated high-velocity streaming war.
What is her objective, then?
Her objective is to take a viral moment, like a clip of her vocal performance on a broadcast television show, and utilize the profound emotional weight of her delivery to convert a casual viewer into a daily, passive listener.
So she needs that viewer to download the Melon app, integrate her song into their morning commute playlist, and just listen to it passively every single day on the train. She secures her chart position through sustained, deeply integrated emotional resonance, creating a long-tail listening habit rather than a concentrated spike of fan activity.
Exactly. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
But this naturally raises the next critical question. If she can't rely on a digital army to force her way onto the charts, and she isn't producing high-energy, viral pop anthems engineered for synchronized TikTok dances, how does she bypass the traditional constraints of global radio? Because securing radio play worldwide is an incredibly expensive, politically fraught endeavor.
You bypass the radio entirely by utilizing the distribution network of original soundtracks.
The OSTs.
Exactly. The OST network allows you to stream directly into the listener's living room.
Instead of a Trojan horse, I look at the OST strategy like subliminal architectural lighting. When you walk into a beautifully designed room, you don't immediately notice the light fixtures hidden in the ceiling, but those lights dictate the entire mood and emotional temperature of the space.
I like that. The OST strategy is brilliant because it entirely bypasses traditional pop music gatekeepers. When your vocal performance serves as the emotional anchor for a prestige television drama streaming globally on platforms like Netflix, you do not need to negotiate with radio programmers in 50 different territories.
The television drama delivers the song directly to the audience precisely when their emotional defenses are completely lowered. They are deeply invested in the narrative, they are experiencing catharsis on their couch, and Gwyn's voice becomes the permanent soundtrack to that emotional release.
But, and this is crucial, an OST strategy only yields long-term streaming conversion if the song itself is a masterpiece of emotional integration. If the track feels pasted on, or if the lyrics don't match the psychological weight of the scene, the viewer will simply skip the credits and the song will completely fail to chart.
Which is exactly why we need to perform a deep lyrical and thematic analysis of her track, Losing My Heart. She released this on May 23, 2026, as part 3 of the official soundtrack for the massive global hit drama, My Royal Nemesis. And it perfectly exemplifies the philosophy of her mentor, the international voice coach Jojo Acosta, who preaches authenticity without spectacle.
It is an absolute masterclass in severe vocal restraint.
The song is an incredibly dark, psychological exploration of grief. It completely subverts the standard upbeat pop ballad structure. The lyrical imagery is haunting. It relies heavily on the recurring motif of the tired shadow, which represents a trauma so deeply embedded in the narrator that it mimics their every movement, dragging them down into a state of absolute psychological exhaustion.
And this thematic tension builds to a horrific realization in the chorus.
Yes, the narrator recognizes that the pain of their memories is so unbearable that the only path to survival requires an act of profound internal violence. They explicitly state that they must cut off their own heart. They have to sever their own capacity to feel emotion entirely, simply to continue existing.
When you cross-reference this lyricism with the narrative of the drama itself, the synergy is just flawless.
It really is.
My Royal Nemesis revolves around characters defined by profound alienation and trauma. The female lead is a displaced soul from 300 years in the past who was violently executed and is now trapped inside the body of a modern scandal-ridden actress. She is completely alienated from her own physical existence.
A literal tired shadow.
Exactly. And opposite her is the male lead, a tycoon hiding behind a carefully constructed facade to conceal severe physical and psychological scars from a fire he barely survived in his childhood. Both protagonists have spent their lives attempting to cut off their own hearts to shield themselves from further agony.
So when these characters finally collide on screen and their protective walls begin to fracture, Gwyn's voice swells in the background. But she deliberately avoids belting high notes or engaging in flashy vocal gymnastics.
She doesn't overpower the scene.
No, she delivers the lyrics with an agonizing, breathy vulnerability, sounding as though the sheer act of singing is draining the life force out of her. It forces the viewer to physiologically experience the exact exhaustion of the characters on screen. It's classical conditioning pairing a specific chord progression and vocal texture with a recurring emotional trauma.
The viewer isn't consciously deciding to stream a Gwyn Dorado single at that moment. They are experiencing the climax of a highly engaging narrative, and her voice becomes permanently linked to that emotional memory.
But as effective as this strategy is, she is not operating in a vacuum. She has crafted a masterpiece of emotional integration, but looking at the intense 2026 award season, she is walking into a highly competitive bloodbath.
Oh, the competition is exceptionally fierce this year. Because the legacy conglomerates have recognized the immense power of the OST network and are deploying massive corporate marketing budgets to dominate it.
Her primary external competition stems from the massive streaming drama Perfect Crown. The corporate giant behind it didn't just release a soundtrack, they engineered a calculated pop culture event. They stack their soundtrack with high-energy, heavily marketed tracks by top-tier acts to basically guarantee algorithmic dominance.
They are utilizing a strategy of overwhelming force.
You have the soloist BB dropping a massive anthemic track. You have elite, top-tier boy groups like Boy Next Door and Rise providing high-energy pop tracks that automatically trigger their massive fan armies to begin streaming and voting campaigns.
And to compound the pressure, the lead actor of the drama, Bayan Woo-suk, who commands an insanely devoted following himself, provides the final OST track.
That is an overwhelming concentration of star power explicitly designed to dominate both the streaming algorithms and the popularity-based fan voting categories.
And beyond the external threat, Gwyn also faces intense internal competition from her own drama. Award shows typically nominate only one song per drama to prevent a single highly popular show from sweeping the category.
Right, so Gwyn's track has to compete internally against Season of Us, performed by Young K from the band Day 6, who possesses a massive, highly dedicated domestic Korean fan base.
This structural reality forces us to ask, how does an artist utilizing solitary acoustic minimalism survive against corporate pop titans backed by mobilized digital armies?
Yeah, how does the organic strategy overcome the massive corporate marketing budget?
By recognizing that she is competing in a fundamentally different lane. We have to extrapolate the criteria of prestige television awards in Korea, such as the Baeksang Arts Awards or the Blue Dragon Series Awards. These institutions do not operate purely as metric-driven music shows.
They have actual judging panels, right?
Exactly. They rely heavily on panels of expert judges who evaluate the artistic merit and the narrative integration of the song into the cinematic material.
So they're judging the emotional resonance of the art, not just calculating the raw streaming math.
While the high-energy pop-centric tracks completely dominate the rapid consumption streaming charts, Gwyn's acoustic minimalism establishes a distinct, highly sophisticated lane. Her narrative gravity allows her to target those prestige awards. The judging panels recognize that her track elevates the cinematic quality of the drama.
She doesn't need to defeat the boy bands in a localized streaming war.
No, she just needs to be the specific vocal performance that the judges remember making them cry during the emotional climax of the season.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of these two blueprints. We have spent this deep dive extensively outlining the absolute independence of SB19's startup model, their self-funded arena tours, their retention of intellectual property, and their unedited talent acquisition. And we have contrasted that with the elite institutional assimilation of Gwyn Dorado, her dual agency framework, her linguistic mastery, and her domination of the OST network.
And the true value of this analysis lies in how these two seemingly opposed massive success stories are actively intersecting to create a brand new blueprint.
Because the future of global pop dominance is not strictly indie and it is not strictly corporate, it is a highly customized hybrid.
It's the best of both worlds.
Exactly. Gwyn is operating deep inside the Korean machine, but she was strategically borrowing highly compatible elements directly from the independent playbook of SB19. Specifically, she is utilizing culturally embedded local branding.
This is a brilliant strategic adaptation of the independent model. Look at how SB19 manages their corporate communications. They completely refuse to treat their fans as mere consumers, and they refuse to treat their corporate sponsors as transactional entities.
They utilize highly specific, culturally embedded familial terminology. Like, they address their corporate sponsors publicly as godparents. They address their veteran fans as co-parents.
That strategy is distinctly Filipino. It takes a cold, transactional business relationship and reframes it into a high-trust, familial alliance.
You aren't just purchasing a concert ticket or signing a sponsorship deal. You are actively supporting the family business.
And it creates an unbreakable bond of loyalty that transcends a standard corporate marketing funnel.
And Gwyn is applying this exact same familial warmth, but she is executing it within the notoriously rigid and polished Korean system. She maintains a highly relatable, radically transparent public presence. She refuses to hide behind the flawless, untouchable idol persona that the legacy labels usually mandate.
She actively posts about the deeply frustrating process of learning the Korean language, and she transparently shares her struggles with her university academics.
By showcasing the friction of her daily life, she actively strips away the corporate gloss.
She turns casual, passive listeners into deeply loyal family members who feel a personal investment in protecting and supporting her journey, basically mirroring the protective instincts of the independent fandom, but without triggering the militarized digital warfare aspect.
We are also seeing her bridge the gap between the solitary balladeer lane and the high-energy pop ecosystem through highly strategic collaborations. She is finding ways to interact with the massive idol infrastructure without compromising her acoustic identity.
Which is a very delicate balance to strike.
It is. In May of 2026, she participated in live busking sessions and a massive performance at the Hong Kong Sevens alongside the Korean pop girl group Primrose. She also released a track called Purple Love, which was produced by the elite Korean hip-hop producer Code Kunst.
These collaborations act as calculated cross-pollination. By performing alongside an idol group like Primrose and working with a hip-hop heavyweight like Code Kunst, Gwyn introduces her pristine acoustic identity to highly engaged, trend-focused idol and hip-hop fandoms.
She borrows their massive digital reach and algorithmic momentum for a brief moment, proving she can operate seamlessly within the modern pop landscape before retreating back to her sophisticated balladeer lane. It is basically a surgical strike of cross-promotion.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the absolute pinnacle of this intersection, the ultimate hybrid strategy, the original Philippine music Korean wave bilingual strategy.
This is the visionary endgame that totally alters the flow of cultural exports. Gwyn is essentially utilizing the massive trillion-dollar infrastructure of the Korean wave as a distribution vehicle for Filipino storytelling.
She has acquired the institutional leverage necessary to take classic OPM, translate those beautifully devastating acoustic ballads into perfect Korean, and present that sophisticated musical framework to a global audience that is already hardwired into the Korean entertainment machine.
She is reverse engineering the cultural export model. Instead of importing Korean pop into Manila, she is using Seoul's global distribution network to export Manila's emotional storytelling back to the world.
The synthesis of these two forces is remarkable. For over a decade, the music industry in Manila looked strictly to Seoul for the definitive pop blueprint. Agencies were desperately trying to figure out how to replicate the Korean methodology.
But today, the Architects of Independence, SB19, have proven that Filipino artists possess the sheer willpower, the logistical brilliance, and the business acumen to build their own global infrastructure entirely from scratch. They proved they no longer require the legacy machine to access the global stage.
And simultaneously, Gwyn Dorado has proven that Filipino artists possess the extreme adaptability and linguistic brilliance to master the most complex, insular legacy systems on Earth from the inside out, utilizing those systems to their own advantage.
If this dual-pronged success is initiating a massive paradigm shift in the global music industry, the old center of gravity is actively destabilizing. Let's just quickly summarize the journey we've mapped out today.
Sure.
We started by dissecting Onesie Entertainment's grassroots startup model. We looked at the economic efficiency of raw landscape YouTube auditions, the extreme risk management required to execute a self-funded 19-city global arena tour, and the foundational importance of retaining intellectual property to secure the mental liberation of total corporate control.
That is the ultimate blueprint of defiant independence.
Then we contrasted that with the elite institutional leverage of South Korean OSTs. We tracked how a fiercely independent, self-taught musician utilized the dual agency framework of Seoul to bypass the financial constraints of global radio, utilizing subliminal architectural lighting to stream her emotional storytelling directly into international living rooms.
That is the blueprint of strategic assimilation.
And finally, we observed how combining the self-determined, high-trust, familial branding of the independent model with the massive legacy distribution networks of the institutional model creates the absolute ultimate global pop blueprint for 2026.
Which leaves us with a highly provocative structural reality to consider as we close this analysis.
I'm all ears.
If we synthesize all the data points we've discussed today, we must acknowledge a shifting dynamic regarding industry sustainability. The legacy South Korean idol system is famously grueling, and it possesses a deeply documented systemic negative toll on the mental health and longevity of its artists. The independent group we discussed explicitly abandoned that model to build a healthier, artist-first ecosystem where they could control their own pacing.
They built a sustainable sanctuary.
They did. Now, if independent artist-led labels like Onesie Entertainment continue to scale globally, proving that you can achieve massive arena-level revenue without the psychological torment of the legacy boot camp, and if artists like Gwyn Dorado continue to flawlessly utilize Korean infrastructure to normalize Filipino creative dominance at the very top of the global charts,
How does that reshape the map of the industry?
I believe we are approaching a reality where Aspiring Asian artists, whether they originate from Bangkok, Tokyo, or even Seoul itself, will choose to fly to Manila for their executive training and artistic development.
Wow. Instead of Seoul.
Yes. And they will make that choice not because Manila successfully copied the Korean system, but because the independent operators in Manila evolved past its inherent flaws to create an infrastructure that is fundamentally superior, highly adaptable, and significantly more humane.
You want to completely dominate the global pop music industry today. The old binary blueprint is permanently shattered. The diagnostic landscape of what makes a global star is shifting rapidly, and the new architects are actively compiling the new source code as we speak.
It's a brand new era.
The only question remaining for you is whether you possess the operational stamina to build your own fortress from scratch, or the linguistic and emotional brilliance to conquer an entrenched fortress from the inside out. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the specific forces reshaping global pop. Keep your ears open to these shifting tides, and we will catch you on the next one.